Good evening. Now, a number of lens manufacturers out there in the past, including Sony, Canon, Fuji and Laowa, have produced STF or smooth transfocus lenses. They are sometimes known as APD lenses because they incorporate a special internal optic called an apodization filter, which makes the quality of your bokeh look way smoother than usual, and so they're especially prized by portrait photographers. One of the very first lenses to do this was made by Minolta, a 135mm model from 1999 that Sony eventually remarketed under their own name. They were never massively popular for digital SLRs back in the day, as they're expensive to make and the apodization element is hostile to phase detection autofocus systems that SLR cameras mostly relied upon. However, mirrorless cameras today are more dependent on contrast detection autofocus, although there's a little technical crossover between the two methods, which works fine with lenses like this. And that particular history lesson leads us to Exhibit A, the Sony FE 100mm f2.8 STF GM OSS. It's a full-frame autofocus portrait lens for their mirrorless E-mount cameras, and it costs £1,400 here in the UK or $1,500 US. I'd like to thank Sony UK for loaning me this lens for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. And here is some of its bokeh for you. As you can see, that apodization element is doing its job perfectly, as those out of focus backgrounds are beautifully, wonderfully smooth. While they look amazing, they're not actually the most out of focus that you can get. The lens's maximum aperture is only f2.8, and the apodization effect also has a bit of an impact on how deep the bokeh looks, cutting into those specular highlights in order to soften them up from the outside. For example, here's a shot taken at f2.8 or t5.6, now here's f4 or t6.3, and now f5.6 or t7.1. The differences are not big, are they? And that's because the smooth bokeh effect gets logarithmically smaller the more you stop down, dissipating altogether if you stop down as far as f8, which has a light transmission of t8. You heard me mentioning T numbers there. The lens's apodization element also has a big effect on light transmission, so your shutter speeds will be lower than normal on this lens too at brighter apertures. To help illustrate, here is how the lens's aperture ring looks. The markings are showing you that the STF effect only works at brighter apertures than f8, and they're also showing you the light transmission in t-stops at those brighter apertures. Sony really should have put the f-stop numbers in there too though, I think, especially as they advertise the lens as being f2.8 in the first place, which it technically is. All of that to say, while it is an f2.8 lens, your shutter speeds will be slower than normal, and those out of focus backgrounds won't look quite as out of focus as you may be expecting, but they will look stunningly beautiful. Hope that all makes sense. The lens itself has excellent build quality in line with any other Sony G Master model. It's rather big, but it doesn't feel too front heavy on your camera, being quite well balanced. Its body is mostly made of plastic, but it certainly feels very solid and tightly assembled. It weighs 700 grams or about 1.5 pounds, so it's also a little on the weighty side. The lens is advertised as being quite well weather sealed, and it does indeed have a slight weather sealing gasket on the rear mount. There are a lot of control points on the lens too, which is always handy. First comes a special control ring to switch between the lens's close shooting mode and normal shooting up to infinity, and that ring has a little locking switch on the side. Then comes the aperture ring, which can be set to click nice and confidently every third of a stop, or it can be set to turn smoothly, which yields some lovely smooth aperture changes when video making. Then comes a switch for the image stabilization, or OSS as Sony call it. Here's some footage with it turned off and now turned on, where you can see it doing an averagely good job. Here we also get a manual focus switch and a focus hold button on the side of the lens. Then comes a rubberized manual focus ring, which turns satisfyingly smoothly. As you can see, the lens suffers from moderately strong focus breathing, zooming in as you focus more closely. Now, let's see about the autofocus motor. It works silently and accurately, and in single-shot autofocus mode it works averagely fast. Switch over to continuous autofocus mode and, well, it's no faster. But my guess is that's because STF lens designs are hostile to the phase detection autofocus points embedded in the sensor that makes things run a bit faster. The lens comes with a nice carry case and a very good quality hood with a rubber trim on the outside edge. It has a 72mm filter thread size. Overall, we're looking at wonderful build quality here, which really makes a difference. The lens is very enjoyable to handle and use out in the real world, and it's good to see image stabilization thrown into the mix as well. The aperture ring is slightly confusing, but you'll be keeping the aperture wide open with this lens in virtually all circumstances anyway. More importantly though, of course, is the lens's image quality. Let's start by testing it on a full frame camera, my 42MP Sony a7R III. In-camera corrections are turned on. Straight from f2.8 or t5.6, the lens is razor sharp in the middle with excellent contrast. That sharpness continues across most of the image frame. The image corners are just a tiny bit softer, but still great. Stop down to f4 or t6.3 for a little better contrast in those corners, but even if you stop all the way down to f8, sharpness in those corners is great, but not perfect. The lens stays this sharp down to f11. Stop down any more than that and softness will emerge from diffraction. Still, a brilliant performance here with tons of sharpness and contrast straight from the brightest apertures. It's true that some portrait lenses can offer very slightly sharper image corners than this, but you'll want those peripheries to be out of focus anyway when shooting portrait, so it doesn't really matter. Well, let's see how the lens copes on an APS-C camera then. Again, straight from f2.8 we see absolutely perfect sharpness and contrast in the middle of your images, and the corners basically is good. So here we are seeing the sweet spot advantage of an APS-C sensor. Again, the lens stays this sharp down to f11. So if anything, the lens is even better on APS-C, offering an essentially perfect performance there. Anyway, let's go back to full frame, turn off in-camera corrections, and take a look at distortion and vignetting. The lens shows a bit of pincushion distortion here, although portrait photography traditionalists will argue that that's actually a benefit, as it makes your subject look a little slimmer. Interestingly, at a brightest aperture, the lens shows basically no vignetting at all. For lenses in general, that's a unique characteristic, but this was also the case with Sony's old 135mm f2.8 STF lens, so I guess that's simply a beneficial side effect of the apodization glass. Nice. Next, close-up image quality, and this lens can focus down to an impressive 57cm for great close-up images. Combined with a beautiful bokeh, that makes this a wonderful option for close shooting. What else is wonderful to see is that, even at f2.8, the lens's close-up image quality is as sharp as ever. Very nice. When it comes to working against bright lights, we get just an average performance here. Some glaring and flaring is visible, although it's not totally out of control, so do use the lens's included hood when shooting. Now we come to the point in the video where I normally test a lens's bokeh. Well, as you've seen already, it's simply stupendously soft. However, I will mention that exceptionally bright specular highlights can have just a very slightly dark edge to them. Finally, longitudinal chromatic aberration. It's there at f2.8 I'm afraid, but I've seen much worse than this before. As you stop down to f4, f5.6 and f8, it slowly begins to clear up. Apart from that little niggle though, this is virtually the perfect portrait lens. Bucket loads of sharpness, great build quality, no vignetting at all, a brilliant close shooting ability, and, most of all, simply incredible bokeh. The setbacks are that its shutter speeds are quite slow due to the low light transmission, and the autofocus is slightly on the slow side as well, although considering the lens's special design, that's almost certainly an unavoidable technical limitation. Also, the lens's maximum aperture isn't super bright, so it doesn't actually get you the most out of focus backgrounds imaginable. It's just that those backgrounds happen to look amazing. Those issues, combined with its rather steep price tag, definitely makes this rather a niche lens, in my opinion. But still, a unique and frankly quite wonderful one, so it certainly does come recommended to anyone who really wants exactly what this thing can offer. Boy howdy do I enjoy testing out special lenses such as these. My wife really appreciates the portrait pictures too. You should see her Facebook profile. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as usual, a special thanks to my Patreon supporters who make a huge difference to me keeping these sponsorship-free videos coming. Check out my Patreon page down in the description below, where supporters get access to all kinds of exclusive bonus content and early access to special reviews as well. Ciao for now, everyone.